Okay, so thanks for having me. Oh, great. Okay, so there's a question that I'd like you to consider in the background during this talk. Where does design begin and nature end? This could have been an alternative title of the talk. You know that pitching design against natural things is an argument that in rhetorics is called appeal to nature. It's a flawed argument because it's considered to be a way to cheat in winning an argument, because the underlying assumption is that what is natural is superior or more precious because unique. In design practice, these assumptions precede the choices that designers make. But the meanings associated with constructs like nature, environment, and human development do change over time and across communities. Just to start, arbitrarily, as many design histories, we can start with modernism. That's what Laszlo Moholy-Nagy in The New Vision wrote about the relationship between nature and design. Right, use nature as a constructural model and always looks for prototypes in nature to determine functionality. And this, he wasn't the only one at the Bauhaus thinking of nature as a constructional model. Wassily Kandinsky, for instance, designed a famous exercise in which he placed a fish tank in the middle of the classroom and just asked students to draw the lines of the fish swimming in water. So what they were doing was thinking of nature as a library, as a repository of forms. When the Bauhaus shut down, the first stop on that trail was London, actually, and one of the most so remarkable traces of this passage was the London Zoo, in which designers had Bauhausler had the prime opportunity to work with nature, and to actually physically build this idea of nature as a textbook. See, that's the studio of animal art. But what you see here is also nature as spectacle. So this could be a movie theater. Most famously in the infamous penguin run, in which penguins were forced basically to perform a choreography. Okay, so that's the background question. What I'm looking at today is a project called Objects of the Forest, facilitated by Brazilian designer Andrea Bandoni in 2012. And then I'm offering some reflections on the objects of the forest based on my reading of this book by Claude Lévi-Strauss, The Sauvage Thought, and the idea of arborescence and rhizome as developed by Deleuze and Guattari. Just as a way to self-situate myself, this is the place where I work. It's my main place of work. It's the CAS, School of Art, Architecture and Design, part of London Metropolitan University. Before joining the CAS, I was a researcher at the University of Oslo on a project on the history of the impact of environmentalist thinking on design practice. And then finally, among other things, I'm a trustee of the Design History Society, a website that I invite you to visit because we also have awards and grants that you can apply for. So back to the Objects da Floresta, Objects of the Forest. this exists as a book and existed as an exhibition. It's the result of a long research trip that Andrea Bandoni took along the Amazon River in 2012 after he returned to Brazil from the Eindhoven School of Design, where she had been educated. The aim of the project was twofold, as Bandoni wanted to study the products used by the local population in the Amazon, but also the approach, so the general approach behind those very objects. Even if the survey only collected, as the product of the survey was collecting a few objects, there was no intention to replicate, to invite designers to replicate. So the design solutions that you'll see. There was a strong emphasis, however, on the perception of the environmental crisis. The survey of the local Amazonian material culture is meant to provide a reminder that other material lifestyles do exist, waste manufacture and use that depend on natural conditions for their production and are rooted in a non-consumerist culture, in Bandoni's word, derived from techniques that survive from artisanal practices, often endangered. The Objects of the Forest project, in its very premises, was an attempt to mark the boundaries of a sanctuary, of a space to protect and to maintain free, so to speak, of human intervention, at least of the capitalist kind. While reading the introduction to the book version of the project, I was reminded of a passage from this book by Joe Ponti, who again was a modernist, even though in this case it's the second wave of modernism, as the book was published in 1957. Joe Ponti, who was an established influence in that landscape of post-Second World War design and architecture, published a collection of reflections and texts that also feature a series of short visions that Ponti himself labeled prophecies. And one of them is exactly about design and tropical environments. Civilization moved away from the tropics on its quest to find better environmental conditions and thrive. Likewise, civilization shall move back to the tropics, because it is there that one can find the best living conditions. This is my prophecy, writes Ponti. The lands that for many years seemed inhospitable to modern man, today can be easily reached thanks to means of transport that can quickly bring us anywhere. There, in the happiness of the tropics, argues Ponti, modern architecture shall find the best conditions and thrive. Anywhere else, architecture is a complex production, a burrow above ground. At the tropics, architecture is a pavilion to live in the middle of a natural paradise. He was writing about Venezuela and Brazil. When I read this passage, I checked again the publication date of the book and quickly registered the words as a relic of a recent past form of Orientalism. Perhaps unintentional, even naive, and an unwitting form of Orientalism. An imagined ideal is projected onto a subject until the latter is eventually overshadowed. The imagined ideal eventually takes the place of the original subject. In addition, there is this casual way in which Ponti defines the man who moved away from the tropics as modern. therefore implying that those who stayed behind are pre-modern. Is it good or bad to be pre-modern? Obviously, he was taking the perspective of a privileged European person speaking about an exotic place. His interpretation of what tropical design stands for is defined only by geography on top of it. Anything that is at the right latitude will share common features. It is a vision that does not appear to take into account endogenous cultural or historical processes. This is a narrative built on a straightforward parallel. Material culture at the tropics is exuberant because the very natural environment is thriving and teeming with a variety of life forms. Interestingly, this vision was at odds with the story recounted by another European around the same time, Claude Lévi-Strauss, who had spent several years in Brazil, and among books on the subject, wrote this journal in which he recounts the story of the interior struggle he experienced while trying to understand, to connect to the context and fit into it, both intellectually and physically. This was quite a departure from the paradise that Ponti depicts. Lévi-Strauss describes the impact of development on the natural environment, the return of that architecture as a quick shrinking of the world, with the city of São Paulo as paradigmatic in its continuous growth, daily growth. So Lévi-Strauss feels that the ease of traveling within and without lands like Brazil will eventually engender the emergence of a global monoculture. After looking carefully at the Object of the Forest project, I try to compare it with that prophecy by Ponti, especially the one where he talks about the tropics as a latitude in which architecture is not about protecting oneself from the environment. Design, he argued, is free from any constraints because nature already provides enough to sustain human life. One can live off nature. Architecture is a form of expression free from the functionalist need to protect humans from the weather. But can one really differentiate approaches to design on the basis of latitude instead of historical or political reasons and other random accidents? At first, Objects of the Forest seemed to reinforce this view of nature as a benign mother who is only eager to concede her fruits to her children if only they know how to listen to her. Bandoni developed Objects of the Forest after returning to Brazil from Eindhoven. The exploratory phase of the project took place in April 2012 as a series of workshops that involved local communities and design students. Bandoni just announced workshops in towns and cities and villages along the Amazon River and collected participation applications from which she operated a selection. Designers and locals and designers from her entourage worked together with engineers and people from other backgrounds, occasionally also invited to take part. Bandoni describes this phase of the project as a time when participants were interested, were willing to take part, but also the locals were predominant in number over foreigners. She writes, this was because we preferred local people. The goal of the project was to interact with local professionals, and it was a very efficient way to get information about the objects and processes. It was interesting to see that besides living so close to an amazing forest, most participants saw design possibilities in nature for the first time in this workshop. A great and unusual exchange happened. We could prepare and offer them this possibility, and this opened them to tell us a lot of things they knew about nature. We were told that workshops facilitators usually just want to steal some nice materials or ideas. So people were, she concludes, very touched by the project and the workshops. Again, in a way that is reminiscent of Ponti, also Bandoni presents the rainforest as a place where you can take, use and reuse whatever you need in a sustainable and ecologically responsible manner. A place where you have the ability to pick objects from a tree as though it was from the shelves of a supermarket, or take objects out of an animal. A place where tools and everyday objects literally grow on trees, and furniture is made from wood that has grown only a few meters away from your house. The project was funded by Funarte, an agency which is part of the Ministry of Culture of Brazil. So it was an official endorsement. And finally, the results were presented in September 2012 at the Museu da Casa Brasileira, which is São Paulo's main design museum. The objects of the forest collected in the project and exhibited in the museum fall into three basic categories. The most predictable one is made of vessels and containers. Fruits fallen from the trees are simply left to dry and cut in halves, and they are ready to become bowls. Like the cuia, or in particular the cuia de macaco. Leaves are braided into a meshwork and assembled on a rigid structure to be used as a backpack, or folded under the arm to be used while foraging in the forest. This category also includes hammocks, again assembled with natural textiles, such as shredded bark or stems of plants. Each one has each inhabitant of the Amazon River carries an individual hammock while traveling on the river boats. So the boats have no public seating, just poles that travelers use to tie their own hammocks in a forest-like fashion. So it's an important artifact. The second category includes tools and instruments. One remarkable one is the tipiche, an oblong squeezer made of intertwined fibers that serves to squeeze ground cassava root, manioca, over several days until the poison it naturally bears has disappeared. So, the cassava root, manioca, when wild, actually has a toxin, so it has to be reduced to a pulp and left in water of several days. Another example, the spathe of a palm tree, which protects fruits and flowers while attached to the trees, once fallen to the ground and naturally dried, becomes a large rocking cradle for newborn babies. The user just has to wait and collect. Again, we're still in the utensils section. The piraku tongue is the tongue of a giant river fish, an animal that can reach 250 kilograms in weight and 3 meters in length. Disembodied from the original creature it once served, this bony tongue dries up to become an instrument. Its surface is covered with hard bristles that, when the animal was alive, helped to grab and hold prey. It's now used to grate sticks of dried guarana fruit. Also, the scales of the fish are harvested and are used as files, like nail files. But the most remarkable category is made up of objects that have no immediate functional value. They are, in addition, they are simply collected from the environment, like a Duchamp style ready-made. While the functional objects of the other two categories were mostly imagined and realized or collected with a purpose in mind, this one once appear to have been collected without a precise reason, exclusively because of the iconicity of their presence. The Casa Jakarta is a wasp's nest collected only for its sculptural form. Shaped like a white cylinder, it's made of wood chewed by the wasps until it becomes a malleable paper, and then spat out until a complex skyscraper-like structure arises, complete with vertical passageways. Architect wasps. The nest in its environment hangs from the branches of trees. When collected, two sections of the branch are kept in place. The two broken lengths of wood depart horizontally from the top of the Kaaba as to form an effigy, a human image with their arms stretched out in space, as if gracefully trying to maintain balance. The cuia de macaco is a naturally bowl-shaped fruit that hangs from the branches of the trees above the river. It contains a multitude of nail-shaped seeds tightly packed within. When the time for the seed dispersal is ripe, normally the lid comes off the bowl and the nail goes slicing through the air until they meet the surface of the water, ready to be transported to new ground. The people of the forest collect the fruit when it is dry, but right before the lid has sprung away. When opened, the cuia de macaco reveals a solid surface of nail heads. Each one is different, and so if they are disturbed, composing them again is like playing a jigsaw puzzle. So this is a toy. When it comes to center-periphery relations, the Amazonian rainforest is often treated like a sort of South American Wild West. It has been intensively exploited from an economical point of view, but often ignored and neglected from a cultural perspective. The rainforest is an integral part of the country's identity and economy, but its fate is discussed and decided thousands of kilometers away. The various voices that have tried to denounce numerous crimes and destructions have been silenced over time. The rest of the country has socially and culturally neglected the Amazon over the past century for colonial reasons, because the country's centrality was entrenched in the southeast. It's in Brasilia, São Paulo and Rio that the Amazon's fate is discussed. The form of appreciation of Amazonian design one reads in the Object of the Forest project resonates with the work of architect and critic Lina Bobardi, who in 1964 also explored the material culture of the northeast of Brazil and curated an exhibition on some of its artifacts. Bobardi, who lived between 1914 and 1992, was also a modernist architect born in Italy, generation of Joe Ponti, but she naturalized as a Brazilian after World War II. She graduated from the University of Rome in 1939 and moved to Brazil in 1947, where she went on to become a prolific writer, educator, and designer. So one of her most famous work is the São Paulo Museum of Art. But her whole activity in Brazil during the second half of the 20th century has been crucial in promoting in the internationalization of Brazilian architectural debate. In regard to Brazilian own material culture, Bobbaggi was keen to stress that the national and the nationalist dimensions are completely separated. In the catalogue of the exhibition on the Northeast Brazilian material culture she curated, she insisted that the show was about the civilization, or the culture, we would say, also, of the Northeast, and the technological ingenuity and plastic abstraction of artifacts conceived by excluded people. She thought that this material culture had many a lesson to teach to professional designers. Her appreciation was stripped of any traces of what Bobbaggi herself designated as patronizing mythology, and identified as one of the main aspects of Brazilian modernism. The books that recounts her experience is significantly called the Impasse of Desire. And she's adamant that it's not a question of folklore. Folklore only works for tourists and for those interested in charity. Carefully looking at cultural foundations of a country does not mean preserving forms and material, as she puts it. It means understanding the original creative potentialities. Modern materials and means of production will take the place of the original ones, while preserving the deep structures embedded in those actualizations. To an extent, one could argue that the material knowledge behind the objects of the forest is more effective than the objects themselves. So it resonates with Bobbaggi's words when she says that new technologies can be developed while Northeast design stays true to its original premises. Not least because of the non-verbal reflection they stimulate on the otherwise uneasy relation between the concept of duration and good design. Many materials or whole products are simply found in the forest and require little adaptation to become useful tools. The materials they are made of grew with the forest, and when the objects are disposed of and released in a humid environment, they are seamlessly reabsorbed. These objects are as mortal as their users. Most of the time they are perishable, but what else is not perishable in our industrial production? During the life cycle of an electronic product, the period of effective use ranges on average up to 18 months. Most users will consider a product obsolete by that point, either for cosmetic or compatibility reasons. For the users, the product will perish, but for the environment, its life will extend many years more. It will need to be disposed of properly. It will be necessary to spend precious energy to extract toxic materials and process them. More energies will be spent to recycle what is recyclable, often shipping parts to other parts of the planet, and thus adding to the original footprint. The way entropy is instead embraced by the objects of the forest is remarkable. In itself, the relationship between entropy and design is complex. Design in many ways is a manner to counteract entropy. Yet, most of the materials used in manufacturing will degrade over time. The junctions of the parts will slowly give way. Design will ultimately succumb unless more work is applied. There are very few exceptions, and in most cases they involve continuous labor to maintain the materials. This maintenance labor, in fact, equals to extended manufacturing time. Now, going back to the categories that we have seen in the objects of the forest collection. In The Savage Mind, Claude Lévi-Strauss examined tool making and proposed two different mindsets as approaches to making. The French term bricoleur, which today is used to describe handymen or DIY enthusiasts, originally meant to go against the rules in a game. A bricoleur is able to make do and deal with different tasks by combining pieces of knowledge in novel ways. Bricoleurs or hackers are able to solve problems using limited tools and material. The engineer, on the other hand, is the person who possesses specialized knowledge. Engineers plan in advance. They know which tools and material they need for a certain task. The expression savage mind offers itself to many a misunderstanding, especially when used in conjunction with semantically loaded terms like civilization and culture. But Lévi-Strauss was adamant that the two mindsets are to be found side by side in all cultures at all times. For Lévi-Strauss, the savage mind is the mindset of the bricoleur, while the scientific mind is the mindset of the engineer. The universe of the bricoleur is determined by the conditions in which they have to operate. The universe of the engineer, on the other hand, is open because they possess the knowledge required to actually create tools. All the objects of the forest have a site-specific origin in one way or another, depending on whether they have been conceived in relation to a need or recognized and collected. These are the two categories examined above. Objects such as the containers and the tools are complex creations that required abstractions and planning. Collecting at the right time, imagining the content of the fruit. The engineer designed a solution to a material need and went out to collect the materials to reify, to materialize their intuition. On the other hand, objects like the Cuia de Macaco or the Casa Jakarta are ready-made that the bricoleur got interested into and brought back home. The bricoleur and the engineer are the same person. We're talking about alternative behaviors activated by different mindsets. The savage or the scientific. The objects of the forest, either man-made or animal-made, or even tree-made, are products in which the utilitarian and aesthetic values are not only possible, but acknowledged as such. Perhaps this dark matter that holds the objects together is the material knowledge that users can put to use. To an extent, one could think that the knowledge behind the objects of the forest, maybe unwittingly on the part of the facilitators of the project, is even more effective than the objects themselves. The objects of the forest are temporary, delimited in time by the function they attend. But the knowledge that they stimulated and reified is reproducible. Now, because of my education, the way to make knowledge, to produce knowledge, to which I am most familiar with, is arborescent. It's hierarchic, tree-like, visible, written, like an equation, where you show all passages, like an archive, where every year is represented by a folder, like a syllogism in philosophy, where in logic, where conclusions are drawn based on correct assumptions. Its forms include the database or the footnoted academic paper. For Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, the opposite polarity on this continuum of knowledge making is the rhizome. It grows underground, away from the sun, to suddenly appear as enlightenment. The journey that was traveled underground is not visible. To the possession of the objects per se, the bricoleurs that collected the objects of the forest substituted the possession of the material knowledge required to build a temporary shelter, a temporary vessel, or an ephemeral artifact, designated to respond to a material and yet only transient need. Now, going back to the title of this talk, I had introduced the exploration of nature, or the designerly exploration of nature, as a mode of knowledge production. But in fact, as I'm reaching this stage, final slides, I think that we should think about I should rather present it as a genre of knowledge production, because both modalities, the rhizome and the arborescence, are possible. So rather than a mode per se, it's a genre, and this is the end.
So it's finished. Thank you very much for staying until the end. It's a physical journey to stay here so many hours, but I think it was also a super beautiful opportunity to have this very dense moment of theory after so many books and so many sailings hours and so on. Thank you very much to Paulo and for your hospitality, for all the talks, all the conversations that we had also before, and for showing us your beautiful place and the projection of Lourdes Castro's documentary. We will keep talking. It's not the end. It's just a few fields that we can expand in the future. The idea of the summer school is to start conversation and keep going. So also for all the participants and for the others, it's a moment really to start reflecting together and together understand. So thank you very much also for all our guests that are coming from very far away, and for all the others that were here today. Thank you very much, Maurizio, Cecilia, Magda.
And thank you, Elisa. Thank you. And Valentina and
Can I make one small observation? Because I think actually there's a remarkable crossover that we're talking about some quite different things and we're obviously using different language. I think there was a common platform about bringing together different forms of knowledge. And I think this is quite a profound challenge actually, because knowledge tends to protect itself. So how we get different knowledges to work with each other, I think it's a critical moment right now.
I agree. I noticed all these threads. I think we're going to have a lot to talk about at the dinner table. but I didn't know the content of your presentations, and I was surprised that of the many ways they connected. Yeah, they joined in a rhizomatic way, I have to say. So it was in a rhizomatic way. Yeah.